Today we're going to talk about the foot, ankle, and lower leg. This is going to be the first part of the body that we learn as an individual, and then we're going to work our way up. All right, so going to our slides, a little introduction. We use our foot, ankle, and lower leg for a lot of things all throughout our day. The main thing that we use it for is to help support our weight. Okay, without our foot and our ankles, we wouldn't be able to walk. Okay, they help to transfer weight from one side of the body to the next. Okay, and then clearly in sports that becomes a very important role. Okay, so the first part that we're going to learn is the different type of movements that that occur in the ankle. We talked very, very briefly about this in anatomy, but now we're going to elaborate. So the first movement that we have is called plantar flexion. Okay, plantar flexion. It's pointing your toes down like you're pressing on a gas pedal. Okay. This is different than we've seen. It's not regular flexion or extension like we've seen in other parts of the body. Okay, the opposite movement of plantar flexion is dorsiflexion, where we take the toes and we try to point them up towards our shin. Okay, plantar flexion and dorsiflexion. So as we had seen the opposite of flexion as the extension, here we just have a different type of flexion. Okay, plantar flexion and dorsiflexion. And here's a picture that shows your foot in neutral position, and dorsiflexion is going up towards the knee, and plantar flexion is toes pointed down towards the floor. So we have two more movements in the ankle. Okay, the first one is what we see inversion. Okay, a term that you guys will need to understand is hallux. Hallux is talking about your big toe. Okay, anytime that big toe is moved toward the midline, okay, that's inversion. Okay, this is very important, especially when we start talking about our ankle sprains. Okay, so we have inversion, toe pointed towards the midline, and the opposite is eversion, toes pointed away from the midline. Okay, like I said, this is also going to become important in the ankle sprains because we're going to learn the different anatomy associated with both of these movements. Okay. Here's a picture just showing you your foot in neutral. Toes going in is inversion. Toes going out is eversion. Down, toes going up towards the shin is dorsiflexion, and toes down towards the ground is plantar flexion. Okay, so those are the four movements of the ankle: dorsiflexion, plantar flexion, inversion, and eversion. Now we're going to talk about the movements of the toes. These are a whole lot easier. Okay, so the first one that we have is the flexion. Okay, flexion of our toes. The degree is getting smaller, just like we've already talked about. Okay, the opposite of flexion, you guys already know, is extension. Okay, here we see hyperextension. Okay, if our toes are straight out, completely normal, this is regular extension. All right, we've got flexion, and then we've got hyperextension, and that's what the picture shows right here. The toes are being hyperextended. Okay, so we've got extension, flexion, hyperextension, flexion, extension, hyperextension. All right, those are the movements that we'll talk about in the foot and the ankle. Okay, there's just a handful of movements. Most of them we've heard before, but you will need to know these for your exam. So now moving on to the anatomy. The anatomy is going to be a lot of memorization. Okay, there's going to be a lot of big terms that we haven't heard before, and we're going to have to break this down little by little. Okay, so we already talked about how the ankle and the lower leg helps with our movement. Okay, it also has to carry the weight of our whole body, so naturally it helps with the shock absorbing. Okay, and through the bones that help to provide structure and protection, we also work together with the muscles that help us to produce those movements. Okay, and that's where our anatomy section begins today. So the first picture that we have is showing the bones of the foot. Okay, bones of the foot. There are 28. Okay, 28 bones make up one foot. Okay. You can see the first part that we have are phalanges. Okay. I'm sure some of you have heard that word before. So you can see right here, phalanges, okay, phalanges. We have, our toes are numbered 1 through 5, starting medial and going lateral, okay. So the big toe, that hallux, is going to be toe number 1. Then we have toe number 2, toe number 3, toe number 4, and toe number 5. Okay, in each of those toes, with the exception of the big toe, they're made up of 3 hallux bones, or 3 phalange bones. Okay, and so you can see that on this picture. There's 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, and 3, 1, 2, and 3, 1, 2, and 3, but there's only 1 and 2 here. Okay, part of the reason why it's shorter. Okay. So we have, our phalanges are split into 3 categories: a distal phalange, a middle phalange, and a proximal phalange. Well, these are terms that you've already heard before. So remember, distal means further away, proximal means closer to the midline. Okay, so when you're trying to label your toes, it's very easy for you to be able to figure out what the name of those toes are. Okay, so that's the phalange portion.
It's 12 o'clock.
The next, we're going to move down and talk a little bit more about the joints, okay? Remember that a joint is anywhere that 2 bones are connecting, okay? And it's important to understand that because, especially in the foot, we've got 28 bones where they're all connecting to each other, okay? And so if you can remember that a joint is where 2 bones are connecting, it's going to help you with your terms, okay? Okay, so our first set of joints are called the interphalangeal joints, okay? And if you look at that term, you can see phalangeal looks like phalanges, okay? And inter means that it's in between. So by definition, interphalangeal is talking about in between 2 phalanges, all right? The first set that we have is the PIP joint, proximal interphalangeal joint. Okay, so we know it's going to be in between 2 phalanges, okay, and it's going to be closer to the midline. So let me take away my face for a second, and you're going to be able to see the proximal interphalangeal joints are right here because we've got a phalange on top of it and a phalange on bottom. A phalange on top, and a phalange on bottom, okay? That's the PIP joint, all right? Our next one is DIP, distal interphalangeal joint. So still in between 2 phalanges. We've got a phalange here and a phalange there. Phalange, 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 okay? So our distal interphalangeal joint and our proximal interphalangeal joint. The next joint that we have in our foot is the metatarsal phalangeal joint, okay? We haven't quite gotten to metatarsals yet, but if we look at our pictures, you can see where the phalanges stop and the metatarsals begin, or where we see the metatarsal phalangeal joint, okay? And if you know your names of your bones, you're 75% of the way there, okay? Because you can look and see that looks like metatarsal and that looks like phalanges, and so if you look at your foot and know where those bones are, you're going to be able to figure out where the metatarsal phalangeal joint is. We have 2 special bones that are in our foot. They are called sesamoid bones. Okay, they are itty bitty tiny little bones that live on the bottom side of our foot, underneath our hallux, that big toe, and they helped with flexion. Okay, here's a better picture of those. They're itty bitty tiny little bones, and they sit right there over where our tendon lies. Okay, you just need to know that the sesamoid bones are located underneath that hallux. Okay. Continuing on with our anatomy, we have metatarsals. Okay, just like the phalanges, they're labeled 1 through 5, going medial to lateral. Okay, so this is metatarsal 1, metatarsal 2, metatarsal 3, metatarsal 4, metatarsal 5, okay? I bet you can't say that 3 times fast. And the metatarsal phalangeal joints are these joints right here that lie in between the proximal phalanges and those metatarsals, okay? Moving down closer towards the heel, we've got what we call our midfoot, the tarsal bones, okay? Right here, we've already covered everything in our toes. Now we're moving more towards what we call our ankle, okay? There's several different bones here, and unfortunately, most of them have separate names, so it's not quite as easy as the phalanges or the metatarsals, okay? But these the bones in the tarsal area help us to provide that plantar flexion and dorsiflexion, as well as that inversion and eversion. This is kind of where all those movements come from. So here is a picture of our tarsal bones, okay? So we've already covered everything from here down, all right? So we're looking at the medial side of the foot first, okay? Just because I think it's easier to start all the way from our big toe and go straight down. We have a little group of bones called the cuneiforms, okay? And they have names based on where they are in the body. So we've got the medial cuneiform that is right here on the closest to the midline side. We have our intermediate, which is the one stuck in the middle. And we have the lateral cuneiform that is on the lateral side. Okay, now keep in mind, it's not the most lateral bone in that foot, in that area of the foot, okay? Working distally, or working proximally, excuse me, we have the navicular bone right here. Then we have the talus, which is very, very important for our movements. Then going over on the lateral side, we have the cuboid and the calcaneus. Okay, the calcaneus is referring to our heel. All right, that's most of the time what you guys hear, the heel is the calcaneus. Okay, here's just another image showing you your 3 cuneiform bones, then your cuboid, calcaneus, navicular, and talus. Okay, it's going to be a lot of memorization just to get these bones situated, okay? Another part on our ankle we see, this is our bones that make up the shin, our tibia, and our fibula. All right, our tibia right here being the larger medial bone, and then our fibula being the lateral. All right, at the very end, they both have these points on them that kind of enlarge, and those are called our malleolus, malleoli, okay? So we've got the medial malleolus and the lateral malleolus, okay? And we're gonna fill these on yourself because this is helpful for you to understand what's going on in your body, okay? If you can see that your lateral malleolus comes down a little bit farther on the ankle, all right, this is going to be important for our different types of movement, okay? And the last part that we have for today is our arches, okay? You have 3 main arches in your foot, okay? The first one that you have is the transverse arch, which goes from your heel to the 5th metatarsal and the navicular bone, okay? Kind of hard to see on this picture, okay? The next one is the longitudinal, which goes from the calcaneus to the metatarsal heads, okay? That's going to be the main arch that you think of when you think of your feet. And then you have the metatarsal arch, which is just showing you along the heads of the metatarsals, okay? And what arches are good for is that shock absorbing, okay? So what does that mean if people have no arch or people have really, really high arches, okay? It's going to play a role in any problems that they might have with their feet, all right? Next time we pick up, we're going to talk about muscles of the foot, ankle, and lower leg.